May 1944. Across the vast Pacific, Japanese supply submarines still believed they were safe beneath the waves. But one intercepted message at Pearl Harbor was about to change the course of undersea warfare forever. Inside the code room of Fleet Radio Unit Pacific, a transmission crackled through the static. Submarine 16 preparing to depart for Bougainville. It sounded routine, just a supply notice, but that message would ignite the most devastating submarine hunt in naval history. In the next 12 days, a small American escort ship named USS England, armed with a strange new weapon called the Hedgehog, would sink 6 Japanese submarines without suffering a single scratch, a record that has never been broken. By mid-1944, the Pacific Ocean was no longer free water. It had become a vast killing ground, a battlefield of radar beams, sonar pings, and steel hulls echoing through the depths. At Pearl Harbor, in a dim, windowless room, young American codebreakers leaned over their desks. Only the scratch of pencils and the hum of the telegraph filled the air. They were members of Fleet Radio Unit Pacific, FRUPAC, and that day, they intercepted a short, seemingly harmless message. Submarine I-16, cargo, rice, destination, Bougainville, departure imminent. To anyone else, it was meaningless. To FRUPAC, it was a warning. They already knew about Japan's 7th Submarine Squadron, a patrol line stretching from Truk Lagoon to the Admiralty Islands, a hidden barrier meant to guard the southern front of Japan's empire. If I-16 was moving through that line, it meant the Americans had a chance to strike at the very arteries that fed Japan's war machine. Lieutenant Commander Robert Williamson, the duty officer, put down his coffee and lifted the secure phone. Within minutes, orders were issued. Deploy 3 destroyer escorts, USS George, USS Raby, and USS England. Intercept I-16. No one could imagine it yet, but this single decision would begin the greatest submarine hunt ever recorded. USS England DE-635 was small, barely 1,400 tons. A Buckley-class destroyer escort built not for glory, but for hunting the invisible. Her crew of 186 young men had been trained for one mission, to find submarines and kill them. She carried K-gun depth charge projectors, 2 stern racks, and one revolutionary weapon, the Hedgehog. Developed by British engineers, the Hedgehog was nothing like traditional depth charges. Instead of exploding at preset depths, its 24 projectiles detonated only on impact. Each carried 65 pounds of explosive, enough to tear open a submarine's pressure hull. And because they exploded only on contact, sonar could remain locked on the target throughout the attack. While England cut through the Pacific at 23 knots, far to the west, aboard the Force 16, Lieutenant Commander Takeuchi Yoshitaka prepared for departure. His mission, deliver rice to a starving Japanese garrison on Bougainville. It was supposed to be simple. It was suicide. Japanese submarines had become freight carriers, forced to supply isolated outposts because the surface fleet no longer could. Their deadliest enemy wasn't the bomb. It was the sound of sonar. A single metallic ping in the dark could mean death within minutes. May 19, 1944. Calm seas. Perfect sonar conditions. On England's bridge, sonar operator David Chun rotated the transducer head, listening through his headphones. He had spent 18 months learning to distinguish fish, whales, and false echoes. But what he heard now was unmistakable, sharp, metallic, rhythmic. Bridge sonar contact, submarine bearing 090, range 2,000 yards. The hunt began, England in the center, George on the left, Rabi on the right. 3 wolves closing in. Below the surface, I-16 heard the first sonar pings. Yoshitaka shouted, "Emergency dive!" Valves screamed open. Seawater flooded the ballast tanks, and the submarine plunged downward, 100 feet, then 200. But England held contact. On the chart table, Executive Officer John Williamson, a Cambridge-trained mathematician, began to calculate. Submarine speed, 8 knots. Depth, between 100 and 200 feet. Range, 2,000 yards. Angle of approach, 37 degrees. He wasn't guessing, he was computing. At 13:41, the first Hedgehog salvo roared out. 24 projectiles arced forward and sank into silence. No explosions. Miss Williamson adjusted his geometry. The sub had gone deeper, below a thermal layer at 150 feet. At 13:58, the second salvo hit once. A muffled boom rolled through the water. The crew cheered, then fell silent again. At 14:33, Williamson fired his final pattern. 6 projectiles hit. The shock wave lifted England's stern clear out of the water. Then, stillness. Minutes later, oil, debris, and wooden planks surfaced. I-16 and all 94 men were gone. In Rabaul, no one knew it yet. They thought I-16 had lost radio contact, but Frupak had already intercepted another message. This time, the entire patrol line of the 7th Submarine Squadron. 7 boats, 7 targets. Orders went out from Pearl Harbor. Find them and destroy them all. As night fell, USS England reloaded her Hedgehog racks, recalibrated sonar and radar, and prepared for another hunt. The men ate cold beans and coffee. No one spoke. They knew they had just started something history would never forget. May 22, 1944. The sea east of Truk was calm and gray under morning mist. At 3:50, the radar operator aboard USS George saw a faint blip, 8 miles distant. Surface contact, bearing 070. It was RO-106, running on the surface to recharge batteries. The most dangerous moment for any submarine. Within seconds, George's searchlight cut through the darkness. A dark silhouette flashed, then vanished beneath the waves. RO-106 had crash-dived. But once spotted, a submarine's fate was sealed. 20 minutes later, England's sonar regained contact. Williamson had refined his attack method after E-16. Every ping was now data. Range 2,000 yards, depth 180 feet, speed 8 knots. He ordered fire. 13 projectiles launched. 10 seconds later, the ocean exploded. A massive white column of water rose skyward. Then silence, except for the widening black slick. 59 men gone. Williamson wrote a single line in the log. RO-106, sunk, confirmed. 2 submarines in 4 days. The Japanese command at Truk was confused. Intercepted messages read, RO-106 not responding. RO-104, no signal. Admiral Toyota ordered radio silence for all remaining boats. But it was too late. The Americans already knew the patrol line. May 23, 1944. Radar contact again, 250 nautical miles north of New Ireland. RO-104 on the surface. Within 45 seconds, it had submerged, but that was long enough. USS Rabi, George, and England closed in, triangulating by sonar. Williamson calculated depth 120 feet, course 073, speed 6 knots. He drew a perfect cross on the map. First salvo, miss. Second miss. Third hit. At 8:34, The Pacific shook. 10 to 12 direct hits shattered RO-104's hull. 3 minutes later, the secondary explosions began as compressed air tanks ruptured. All 58 crew lost. 3 submarines in 5 days. An impossible record. In Tokyo, disbelief turned to fear. One officer reportedly shouted, "3 submarines in 5 days? Impossible. Lies." But Admiral Toyota knew better. He realized the Americans were no longer fighting with luck. They were fighting with mathematics. May 24, 1944. Radar contact again, this time RO-116. It was running at 12 knots, gambling on speed to survive. Williamson's equations were now instinct. He fired 1 salvo, 3 impacts. The submarine broke apart under the surface. The sonar picked up a long, scraping sound, metal collapsing inward. For 20 minutes, the operators listened as bulkheads crumpled. Then, silence. 4 submarines, 6 days, not one survivor. By now, the Pacific smelled of oil and death. The surface shimmered black with diesel slicks. Seabirds circled endlessly. But there was no celebration aboard England. Williamson simply said, "We kill them before they kill us." May 26, 1944. England, George, and Raby were running low on ammunition and fuel. Standard procedure was to return for resupply. But Commander Hamilton Haynes made a different choice. "We've got one more hunt in us. If there's another boat out there, we finish it tonight." At 23:04, sonar picked up a new contact, range 1,500 yards, bearing 140, depth 120 feet, course steady. Williamson's voice was calm. "If it doesn't turn in 60 seconds, we have a perfect shot." At 23:23, Hedgehogs fired. Seconds later, a thunderous detonation. The ocean glowed blue with phosphorescent bubbles. RO-108 was gone. 5 submarines, 8 days. By now, Japanese radio traffic had gone silent. No signals, no responses, nothing. Nimitz himself requested all reports from USS England. The data stunned him. Williamson's methods turned submarine hunting into an exact science, a repeatable, predictive system of mathematics, timing, and nerve. And as the Pacific grew quiet, 1 submarine still remained. The most dangerous of them all, RO-105. May 29, 1944. The night sky over New Ireland was moonless and black, a perfect night for a submarine to surface. At 21:30, radar contact appeared, 8 miles out. RO-105. Aboard were 2 commanders, Lieutenant Junichi Inouye and Captain Ryanosuke Sako, leader of Japan's submarine division, a living legend, now the final prey. George's searchlight swept the horizon. Too late. RO-105 had crash-dived within 40 seconds, but radar had already recorded every number Williamson needed: range, bearing, speed, and dive angle. The final duel began. 22:30. USS George fired first. 3 Hedgehog salvos. Missed. RO-105 was playing dead, changing depth, turning sharply, hiding in thermal layers. Every ping of sonar was answered by silence. For hours, explosions rolled across the sea. Sonar operators whispered counts under their breath. 2,000 yards, 1,000, gone. At 2 o'clock, contact was lost. Williamson wiped sweat from his forehead. He knew the submarine was there, just lying still. "Dead quiet," he muttered. Inside RO-105, oxygen dropped below 20%. Men gasped for breath. A logbook later recovered from a Japanese survivor's family recorded, "We lay still as corpses, hearing the enemy above us. The sonar beat like a hammer on our skulls. At dawn, both sides were exhausted. George and Raby had fired nearly all their Hedgehogs. The American crews were covered in oil and salt, running on caffeine and adrenaline. On RO-105, air pressure dropped again. Captain Inouye ordered, 'Surface, half power, get air.' The submarine rose, broke the surface for seconds. Radar caught it instantly. 'Submarine surfacing, bearing 115. Shells splashed nearby. RO-105 dived again, but now its position was fixed. Williamson requested attack permission. Commander Haynes replied with 5 legendary words. "Oh, hell, go ahead, England." 7:36, May 30th. England advanced at 20 knots. Sonar steady, depth 200 feet, course southwest. Williamson drew one last cross on the chart. Fire Hedgehog. 24 projectiles burst forward. 4 seconds later, the first explosion, then another, and another. 6, 7, maybe 10 hits. A massive eruption tore through the ocean. RO-105 disintegrated. Its compressed air systems exploded, breaking the hull in half. 0741. It was over. 55 men, gone in silence. No distress call, no survivors. On England's deck, no one spoke. No cheers. Just the sound of wind and water. Williamson leaned on the rail, watching the oil spread across the waves. "It's over," he whispered. "They're all gone." 6 submarines, 12 days. No American casualties. When the reports reached Pearl Harbor, Admiral Nimitz paused in disbelief. 6 enemy submarines destroyed. 12 days. No losses. Admiral Ernest King ordered every destroyer escort in the Pacific to study England's methods. Submarine warfare had just changed forever. In Japan, Admiral Toyota realized what it meant. Without submarine reconnaissance, Japan was blind. The Empire's undersea fleet, once its eyes and ears, was gone. Weeks later, at the Battle of the Philippine Sea, American carriers sailed unopposed. Japan's naval power was broken, and the ocean, once ruled by the silent hunters, now belonged to the men who could listen better than their enemies. May 31st, 1944. The Pacific was still again. No sonar pings, no explosions, no more enemies. Just waves brushing against England's hull. 6 small stars were stitched onto the ship's flag, one for each submarine destroyed. There was no celebration, no music, only quiet. The kind of quiet that follows something too large to understand. Over 600,000 depth charges had been dropped during the war. Most missed. The Hedgehog changed everything. 20% success rate, 6 kills in 12 days. No guesses, no luck, only precision. At Pearl Harbor, analysts replayed the recordings. One officer said softly, "Williamson didn't hunt submarines. He programmed the ocean." From that moment, anti-submarine warfare became a science. The Williamson method was taught in every naval school. Geometry, acoustics, prediction, and patience. War was no longer fought by instinct, it was fought by data. In Rabaul, Admiral Toyota received the final message. 7 submarines lost, no survivors. The Japanese Navy's eyes were gone. Operation Ago, Japan's final hope for a decisive ambush, collapsed before it began. Without submarines to scout, they were fighting blind. And within weeks, the Philippine Sea turned into Japan's graveyard. All because one radio message had been decoded, and one small ship had listened. The remains of Japan's 7th Submarine Squadron were never found. They lie scattered across the sea floor, rusted, silent, covered in coral. About 400 sailors died in those 12 days. No graves, no names, only the soundless deep. A sailor aboard England later wrote, "When I looked at the oil on the water, I wondered, did they know why they were dying? Maybe not. Maybe they only heard one last ping before the light went out. That was the true terror of the submarine war. Being hunted by an enemy you could never see." When England returned to base, the crew didn't ask for medals or parades. They just wanted one night of sleep without sonar. But word spread quickly. At a press briefing, Admiral Ernest King said, "There will always be an England in the United States Navy." He meant it. In 1960, the new guided missile destroyer, USS England DLG-22, was commissioned. Carrying the same name, the same legacy, no ship has ever matched her record. After the war, John Williamson returned to teach at the U.S. Naval Academy. He disliked being called a hero. When asked for his secret, he simply said, "No miracle, just math, patience, and staying calmer than the other guy." He died in 1971. His tombstone reads, "He listened to the ocean, and it answered." The Hedgehog became standard issue on every Allied escort. Sonar evolved. Radar grew sharper. Human intuition was replaced by circuits and data. It was called the science of kill, and the Japanese never recovered. The loss of their best submarine crews destroyed the foundation of their naval warfare. Experience vanished faster than ships could.